So, a question for both of you is that it's been nearly a decade since all four of these books have come out, and I was just wondering what was your experience as an author reading them again after all this time, and whether you think they have dated well, particularly because for all the short story collections, they are set in Singapore, and for Mei Ching's novel, it's set in a village in China. So, yeah. So, Mei Ching, so you answer and then.
Okay.
Well, for me, I write about mostly human condition. When I was younger, I was full of angst, you know. So, why like this, why like that, and that kind of thing. So, I believe that my stories, I hope my stories capture a kind of timelessness about the issues that still affect everyone today. You know, who am I? Where am I going? Where do I belong? All these are timeless questions. So, when I was reading to them, I was actually looking for typos. So, but as things came back, and I think the issues or the challenges that the characters face, I mean, people still face them today. So, yeah.
Well, actually reading them again, I asked myself, did I really write, that kind of stuff? And I think like most things that we do, is that, gee, I think I could, have maybe written a better story. But then, that aside, I was very amused when, not amused, in fact, when Adele sent me an email and said, hey, gee, a couple of stories, in the book, because I think one of the stories had Lady Hill Hotel, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he said, Lady Hill doesn't exist anymore. and there's a story talking about a China bride, right? And she was asking prospective husband, do you have a car in Singapore and things like that? And he said, oh, it's going to cost me too much to buy a car. It's going to be 50,000. And she reminded me that you can't buy a COE with a 50,000. Then I thought to myself and said, oh, gee, that's quite true. It sort of dated them at a certain time. But then I told her that, if I were to change and update, then the whole story would change. I have to rewrite everything, right? You know what I mean? Instead of Lady here, I said perhaps I don't know what the Fullerton but then it would be different, right? And the same thing of the cast. But we had a good laugh over that and said, yeah, because and Wai Han and sorry, but this is Evergreen imprint. I said, doesn't that what's Evergreen? So hopefully that's Evergreen. And really. I think time and place may not really matter in that sense. If you write about the human spirit, the human, what it is to be human, and etc. The relationships between people. Husband and wife relationship always exist. Father and son, friends, etc. So I think for that reason that many of the stories that we read and enjoy, like Charles Dickens, they survive. Right? We know that the Marshalsea, in the 1800s, right? The conditions again were bad, right? But really, what's important is the people the characters that people the story. All right. I hope that says something.
One interesting detail which I noticed when I was reading your stories is that there are a lot of Japanese expatriates in them.
Oh yes, yeah. If I say that, I have written 4 collections of stories, and every collection has 1 or 2 stories about Japanese. They are really because, and the Koreans, because they're not fictitious in that sense, because I know these people in that sense. In my line of work, I've met with a lot of people, of other nationalities, and I have many, very good Japanese friends, and I got to know them more than just a business associate. I got to know them as a person, and I see the stories in them and the stories behind them, and the stories that open up to me, right? And also I linked up to the Singapore, in the Singapore context, like one of the stories I myself personally like is how the Singaporeans, the older generation was so anti-Japanese. A story like The Sins of the Father in a different book, how strong, that feeling was and still is, that kind of thing. Right. It's true.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that leads me quite well into my next question, because I'm going to ask about your research process and writing process as a writer. And so David, your characters in both Fragrance of Durians and Wives, Lovers and Other Women tend to take place in what might be termed the seedy underbelly, or perhaps like to involve some disenfranchised groups in Singapore. And I was just curious as to what draws you to such characters, and also perhaps if you could tell us maybe an anecdote of how you go about your research that might be interesting for readers.
Does that question stem from this title?
But yes, I think so. You're asking for it.
No, I guess where it comes from because there are a couple of a story about a karaoke girls,
yeah.
and comfort women,
Yeah.
things like that.
You experience all that?
Off the record.
No, I can say that it's a linked experience in the sense that, I've been to the karaoke lounge with my associates, and as I said, I've seen them with stories to tell me. The Japanese culture and the Korean culture are quite close. I mean, Japanese believe that Monday to Fridays belong to the work outside the family, and Saturday Sundays with the family at home, and they really enjoy sort of karaoke lounge, things like that. But you see, I went to them. Sometimes they brought to lounges, and of course, I always tell myself that I am a Singaporean, I'm married, right? I'm not Japanese in that sense, right? So I get to see the stories and I write about them and I talk to the girls, the girls in the lounge, and they have some very interesting stories, and some of them are quite heart-rending because these girls fall in love very easily with their clients, right? And it's just quite true, all right. And I would say that if you write a historical novel, a long story, you may have to do quite a fair bit of research by reading up, or you're setting a place that you're not familiar. But because my stories are pretty short, and I usually find the stories in the people I see, the people I know, a situation, all right, like the wife who ran away, it's a situation. All you got to do is that you read the headline in the Straits Times about this woman who suddenly disappeared on a honeymoon. It's a real story, you know what I mean? And then you put it together and say, why? You ask yourself, why did she suddenly disappear? There has to be a reason. And then you talk about Perth, she disappeared in Perth, right? And Perth, what do Singaporeans go there to see? They love to go to Lake Mungo and they see the black swans, all right? And then you take that up and they say, there's a black swan in Singapore, how do they relate together? And things like that, So I am quite conscious of the fact that most of the stories are as real as they are based on situations that people that I know, like the one I read about Reverend Anthony, and then Popang don't tell me who you think that is. Or the story that I read about a farewell to an island, right? Some of you will know which company or what island, I mentioned island, which company, that probably was and things like that. So, and of course, then I think as a writer, research is one thing, but your eyes and your ears, right? Very important. And my wife always tells me this sometimes, and my dear wife would say that, gee, someday somebody is coming out to punch you, because sometimes I get so engrossed in observing a behavior. Really, and we all know that in Singapore there's such thing as a staring incident, right? That's terrible. Okay. Just save me if you see me in that situation.
I can't remember which writer it was who said, never be friends with a writer because you will end up in the book. Somebody said that.
Don't tell you, I'll be losing friends, or I'll get sued, right?
I thought at the front it says it's all fictitious. Did we put that in?
No.
Nobody takes any responsibility for it all life.
I wanted to put that in, and they said it's not customary nowadays. Right? You take the chance.
Yeah, we should put in.
Yeah?
As if they believe you.
But I always believe that if I write a story about somebody, in wives, lovers, and women, and say this guy that has a mistress, right? If he's brave enough to own up that it's him, then let it be, then we'll see what happens. I don't think he would.
Okay. And a similar question for Mei Ching is that you are a self-described city wimp, okay? And yet you paint a very lyrical portrait of a small village life in Beyond the Village Gate, which is set in China. So I was curious about why you decided to set your story in that setting, and also what research you may have necessarily gotten into in order to write that book.
This book is based on my grandmother's childhood in China. She was one of those girls that was meant to be eaten by dogs. I mean, they still now. So she was really cast aside to be eaten by wild dogs, but she was saved by. I don't know safe or not now, because her life was very hard when she was brought into a family to be the bride of the son, and they were just toddlers, right? But she told me a lot of stories about her life in China, and in a way, and as I was listening and enthralled to this like fantasy world, because we live in Singapore is so different, right? So I said, Grandma, I'm going to write a story one day. So I think the story and the setting chose me in a way, right? So. And how I did research, I wrote the book. I started off as short stories, because of incidents that she told me about, and she, people as they grow older, things change, right? So the stories also change as she went. So I pick up whatever that was that captured my imagination, and I wrote it. So it's partly based on her, and partly it's a new character. So it doesn't really resemble anybody we know.
So you play.
I will swear to my dying day. So when I wrote that, and things that was in that world doesn't exist anymore in our world. Like things like they used to wash clothes, some kind of ash soap thing. I don't know what that is. It doesn't exist in my world. And my grandmother speaks Hokkien. My Hokkien is crap. So my mom, who's sitting there, she was my translator. Hokkien also, second generation Hokkien, all lost in the middle somewhere. So sometimes my grandmother talks about these things. I don't know, it doesn't exist, So I went back to China with her one time, and I saw the village, Dongshan, Fujian. So I went there, eye-opener. And I saw the place she grew up, and the place that I imagined so far, very different, real, right? So when I went back to school, I rewrote the whole thing all in one shot, because now the fantasy land has substance now. I can imagine when I went there, I saw the huts, the cesspool. I tell you can never imagine the smell of cesspools, no matter how much you think you can. But it was just different experience. It changed me, and my research it was difficult to research of things that never existed anywhere, but in someone's past experience, it's never recorded. So in a way, I wrote this book out of love, and of our ancestors also, people in Singapore, everyone knows someone who has been elsewhere. They never originated here. But all this is lost. Because my grandmother never went to school, she couldn't write a word, or except 4D can, but other than that, nothing else, right? So research, nothing. Yeah, I spoke to people. It's based on experiences rather than research. Research my imagination, takes my imagination to describe something I've never seen and make it real.
Okay.
On the reference to people, I think I just signed a contract, right? I'm very conscious now that I didn't read the terms, but so far you have a clause that say that you're not responsible for.
I say to the best of my knowledge. My knowledge is limited, but to the best of the limited knowledge. And that I indemnify, yes, so far, but only to a certain sum of money. Which